Part 31. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 301. Master Norwood dared to ask for a try. He was really confident. As an alchemist, he has been dealing with materials for most of his life. It needs to be purified, separated, combined, decomposed. To take the simplest example, if the purity and concentration of sulfuric acid are slightly different, the price will double. If the concentration is pushed to the point where it is almost smoking, then the price can increase almost tenfold with each further step. High-level magicians can use magic power to purify, but they have no time to deal with basic materials. Low-level magicians do not have enough magic power and control capabilities, so they can only shake bottles, stir crucibles, and wash test tubes by hand. It was in this that Master Norwood found a way to support his family. He developed a magic circle that could accurately purify a specified substance from a mixture. Even if it is a substance he does not recognize, as long as the client gives a sample, the magic circle will naturally operate and separate the required materials at the other end. The only problem is that the energy of this magic array is relatively weak. Master Norwood was a little uneasy. It can only purify liquids and powders, but not large solids. It cannot be used for mining or dressing. And the amount of purification is also very large. Less, an hour, maybe 1 liter at most. That's already good. Gretel jumped up. The output of penicillin is not large anyway. Whether it is filtrate or powder, they are all within the purification range. Let's go and give it a try. The results of this attempt were much better than before. The penicillin purified by the magic array reduces the probability of allergic reactions by half compared to the previous stuff that was dissolved in rapeseed oil, adsorbed with activated carbon, and eluted with distilled water. Greet was overjoyed. Continue. Crystallize and separate the prepared penicillin sodium a few more times to test for allergic reactions. If the probability of allergies is reduced to less than 1%, that's what we want. Obviously, this is a job that requires a lot of manpower and is done bit by bit. Greet laid out the experimental methods and experimental tasks, and asked 2 mage apprentices from the Change School to follow Master Norwood to help. Then he left the Mage Tower to inspect the remaining projects. Sow a handful of seeds in winter and harvest many projects in spring. Gretel finally realized the fun of being a boss. The projects arranged when the Department of Public Health was just established and the Mage Tower was just built are now at the time of acceptance. The improvement of the winemaking method that Leon Carlos is responsible for has basically been completed and is being verified for the last time. To put it bluntly, it's not much trouble. It's just a matter of heating the brewed wine and the bottle to 50 degrees Celsius 60 degrees Celsius, keeping it there for half an hour, and then filling and sealing it. The boy from the Change School was in charge of the coarse salt refining project, which involved adding caustic soda and soda ash to remove calcium and magnesium ions, and then using recrystallization to separate sodium chloride and potassium chloride. Finally, a large amount of potassium chloride was obtained. Greet expressed satisfaction. The most troublesome thing is the methane digester project that the young lady from the Natural God Church is responsible for. The biogas itself was actually developed. Greet squatted next to him and inserted a pipe into the biogas tank, and it was indeed lit. However, the next application promotion task must be undertaken by Greet himself. Build biogas digesters in slums and provide free boiling water. As soon as the middle-aged accountant from the Department of Public Health heard Greet's request, he shook his head like a rattle. This is impossible. Master Mage, have you ever calculated how much it costs to build a boiling water room like this? A standard 18-gallon cauldron costs 1 gold coin and 1 silver coin. A stove that can hold 2 cauldrons, including bricks and walls, will cost you 1 gold coin. Even if the land is owned by the council, you have to build a house, right? The money to build a small house of 15 square meters, even the most dilapidated wooden house, is not cheap. Master Mage, the Department of Public Health has spent tens of thousands of gold coins, and we really have no money. Gretel knew the result without any calculation. It has always been his long-cherished wish to set up boiling water rooms in slums, which can greatly reduce the spread of intestinal diseases. When dysentery was prevalent in Heartland City, he set up temporary water supply points. He has already known the cost of making a boiling water room, or as he put it in his previous life, making a tiger stove. The total investment for such a boiling water room is at least 10 gold coins. According to his estimate, one boiling water room for every 1,000 people in the slums of the city to provide boiling water for free would cost 4,000 gold coins. This does not include the construction cost of the digester. A boiling water room that can provide drinking water for 1,000 people needs to boil at least 2 tons of water a day. A biogas tank that can boil 2 tons of water starts with a conservative estimate of 50 cubic meters. Building a pool, getting pipes and faucets are another huge expense. It's okay, don't let the parliament pay. He gave the accountant a smile. Please do me a favor and make an appointment with people from the Natural God Church, the Spring Water Temple, the God of War Temple, as well as the parliament and municipal departments. By the way, the nearby ones, lords and nobles, please invite a few if it's convenient. I want to do business with them. Gretel's invitation was accepted by many people. A week later, the conference room of Gretel's magic tower was filled with clergy, magicians, nobles, and low-level magicians sent by the city hall, and sat at a table. Want to improve the urban environment? Do you want the streets to no longer stink and have sewage flowing across them? Do you want to increase food production? Greet asked 3 questions in a row. At the first question, the clerks in the city hall nodded. At the second question, the city staff, magicians, and clergy nodded together. At the third question, the noble's eyes lit up. Gretel raised his right hand, and a large roll of drawings fell down on the whiteboard at the end of the conference room and was unfolded in front of everyone. Include additional public toilets at a rate of 1 per 1,000 people in all areas except garden areas. All citizens are not allowed to defecate in public and must use public toilets or dump their feces into the sewage collection outlet next to the public toilet. Poultry and livestock manure must also be thrown into garbage stations. Build biogas digesters directly below public toilets and garbage stations to allow the garbage to fully ferment. My mage tower cooperated with the nature god order to develop and master this technology. The gas produced is led out of the pipe, which can be used to ignite cooking, boil water, and light lamps. The liquid and residue after fermentation are used to fertilize fields, which can effectively increase food production. In Heartland City, my teacher cooperated with the Magic Tower, God of War Temple, and city guards to establish a project. Experiments were conducted on the land of the Magic Tower and Temple, and the efficiency of increasing production exceeded 20%. I am willing to donate the biogas digester technology to the Parliament free of charge and only charge a nominal fee of 1 copper coin per year. The condition is that the Parliament opens the authorization for the construction of biogas pools, and the builders have the right to use all products, but they must use biogas to build boiling water rooms and supply drinking water to surrounding residents free of charge. Who is interested in this project? Thanks to Ed for the 2,000 starting coins reward for attracting cats, playing dogs, and shooting birds. Thanks to Ed for the 1,500 starting coin reward. Thanks to Ed Kutanshari for the 500 starting coins reward. Thanks to Ed Book Friend 201812051045111742 for the reward of 100 starting coins. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 302. After finishing the conversation, there was silence in the conference room. For a moment, the bishop who came to the meeting from the Temple of the God of War turned his head to discuss a few words with the attendants behind him, raised his hand and said, "We want to see the real thing." Greet took them down immediately. The biogas pool is not far from the Mage Tower, just behind the animal breeding room. When cleaning, you can flush the excrement into the pool with a bucket. The Lord Bishop walked around and found that it didn't stink very much, so he nodded with satisfaction. Asked Greet again. Is it convenient to boil water? Gretel took him next door. A hollow rattan snakes out from the ground, with an iron pipe on top, leading directly to the stove. Greet unscrewed the iron pipe valve and cast a spark spell. A flame burst into flames, and soon the boiling water began to gurgling in the iron pot on the stove. How much excrement can be processed in a biogas digester in a day? How much water can it be boiled? Gretel smiled slightly and nodded to the priest girl in charge of biogas research and development. The female priest took a step forward. Next to our mage tower, we built a 10 cubic meter pool. Currently, it is enough to process the feces of 2 big pigs, 3 little pigs, 4 sheep, and a pile of rabbits. If the biogas pool is equipped with a human toilet, it is estimated that 50 a cubic meter biogas pool can be used by 300 to 500 people. A 50 cubic meter biogas pool can produce 2 tons of water a day. In summer, you can boil more water, probably twice as much. Greet added next to him. The bishop lowered his head and did some mental calculations, then asked. Can this rattan be replaced with an iron pipe? Of course. Gretel rushed to answer before the priest girl. Well, the reason why rattan is used instead of iron pipes is that rattan is cheap and can be stimulated by natural magic, which saves money. It was in the research and development stage before, and Gretel didn't give much funding, so everything was used as it was. Then let's get a set from our temple first. It needs 100 cubic meters, at least it can handle horse manure and boil water by the way. He placed the order without asking the price. As he started, the female knight Selena followed and stood up. How much fertilizer can a biogas digester produce? How much can it increase production? A 10 cubic meter biogas digester can produce 12-16 tons of fertilizer and 50-64 tons of biogas liquid a year. 4 tons of fertilizer is enough for 1 acre of land. This time, Greet answered a little less confidently. He estimated the annual amount of fertilizer and biogas slurry produced. He heard about how much fertilizer is enough for 1 acre of land through correspondence with Elder Irwin. As for the effect of biogas slurry on increasing production, all he knows is that production can definitely be increased, and he can't make up the exact amount. However, the female knight had already smiled. After laughing, he frowned slightly and sighed. Not enough. What's not enough? Ever since the female knight took the lead in paying the money during the last hearing, Greet felt a little guilty when he saw her. Without him, the favor of 2,000 gold coins has not been paid back yet. Now that I saw that the other party was too little, I quickly went up to ask. The female knight stretched out her fingers. 1 biogas digester is enough for 4 acres of land. There is 1 biogas digester for every 1,000 people in the city, so there are only 400 to 500 biogas digesters. At best, it can be used for 2,000 acres of land. How can 2,000 acres of land be enough? Gretel sweated. 2,000 acres of land, sister. How big of a landowner are you? These fertilizers are enough for 2,000 acres of land, but you still think it's not enough. However, thinking about the 2 castles under his name and the Viscounty he saw with his own eyes the last time he went there, Greet had to admit sadly. 2,000 acres of land is really nothing to a lady. Your Excellency, this is not how it is calculated. Gretel had to explain to her. The urban biogas digester I planned can burn 2 tons of water every day, and it will have a volume of about 50 cubic meters. So, the fertilizer is enough for 10,000 acres of land. That's about the same. The female knight nodded with satisfaction. How much does it cost to build one? The above ground part, including the water room, costs about 10 gold coins. The underground part? I haven't counted yet. However, there should be discounts if the quantity is large. Including the magic related to modulating biogas pools, you should also be able to talk to the natural god cult. That's not much, the female knight muttered softly. She then flicked her hair around her temples, raised her face and smiled. Apart from being careless, there is something bright and touching. Okay, isn't it just 400 seats? I'll cover it. Selena. Next to the female knight, a young nobleman exclaimed. While making a sound, he took 2 steps forward and subconsciously moved his body in front of her, as if to prevent the female knight from seeing Gretel. Selena glanced at him sideways. Brother, what's wrong with you? It's not expensive. I have to hold 2 less banquets and buy 1 less piece of magic jewelry. This money will be saved. These days, increasing food production is more important than anything else, don't you understand? As he spoke, he walked forward, past the young noble, and walked straight to Gretel. The young noble was speechless, unwilling, and a little worried. His eyes flicked between Selena and Gretel. I'll tell Dad. Yo, my dear little brother, the female knight's eyes flashed and she laughed loudly. I'm going to tell my father, I'm going to tell my father, I'm going to tell my father about any trivial matter. When will you grow up? Selena turned and left. After the plan to build 400 biogas digesters was determined, there was nothing important in this meeting. The guests took their leave one after another, and Greet sent the mage tower out, giving the female knight an extra ride. Seeing the 2 siblings riding their horses side by side and galloping away, the female knight suddenly turned her horse's head and ran back to him like a gust of wind. Mage Nordmark. Your Majesty the Viscount, Gretel, who owed another debt of gratitude, quickly responded. The female knight jumped off the horse and smiled at him. I heard that you have recently taught several businessmen how to improve production technology. How about it? Is there any way you can make a fortune with me? I don't. All this money belongs to the Department of Public Health, and not a penny has gone into my own pocket. Gretel wanted to say this. However, looking at the bright smile of the female knight and thinking about the 5,000 or 6,000 gold coins she had spent before, there was only one answer he could give. Let me think about it. How can it be so easy to make so much money from a business? Even if I have the technology, I still have to consider the cost of transformation and the market capacity. Besides, there is no point in squeezing money from your own people. Improving productivity is the way to go. He frowned in thought. The female knight pursed her lips and waved her palm towards him. Okay, I won't rush you. Think about it slowly. When will you figure it out, and when will you write to me dash? She got on her horse and rode away. Gretel was left alone, tossing and turning in the magic tower, thinking hard. Where can I find a job to make money? Where can I find a technical improvement that can easily earn 5,000 or 6,000 gold coins, and how can I return the favor? If you ask me, it doesn't matter if you don't pay it back. Aurora opened the door and came in. Seeing him curling up into a ball with his head in his hands, barely hiding under the table, Aurora couldn't help laughing. Perhaps they don't want you to pay back at all? The debt keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the debt keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then, I will definitely pay it back. Gretel rolled her eyes at him. It's easy to borrow again, but it's a mess. Let me think about it. Which project should I use to pay off the debt? All the good projects I have been sold. Pasteurization, salt purification, metal thermometers to control furnace temperature to assist in iron making. A bunch of the most valuable projects were all given to the Department of Public Health in exchange for investment, and the others are not so valuable anymore. Is it possible to cooperate in the production of penicillin? No, absolutely not. This project is vital to life and death, and the Parliament must control it. Or the upcoming smallpox vaccine. This is even worse. Vaccines are not meant to make a lot of money. You'd better think quickly, Master Lin An opened the door and came in. Mr. Trochka jumped down from his shoulder, holding a gold-gilded post in his mouth, and sent it to greet. Well, I've specially invited you to their party. If you don't want to sell yourself, just come up with something that can redeem you. The writing of these 2 chapters has not been very good recently, thank you all for being willing to reward. I will work hard to write it down later. Next, I can happily write medical plots again. Also, how do you think little Greet will pay off her debt? Carrot. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Yamengbing for the 1001 starting coins. Thanks to @Leaphair for the R9800 reward of 300 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 303. Eaters are soft-mouthed, but takers are short-handed. Greet, who owed a large debt of gratitude and had yet to repay it, could only rush to the castle of Augustus at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of the ball, just as the afternoon tea started. Not only did he come by himself, Aurora and Lynn also came to the dance to have fun. As for Bernard, wherever there is good food, he will definitely be there. On the soft grass outside the castle, large umbrellas like white flowers were set up, and dozens of ladies were drinking tea and chatting under the umbrellas. Seeing Greet and his party dismounting at the other end of the long bridge and handing over invitations, they all cast surprised looks. Who are these guests? Why did you come so late? The knights who went hunting in the woods have all returned, and the other group of knights competing in front of the castle has changed twice. The female knight went up to greet him personally. Aurora and the others consciously stepped back and watched Gretel and her walking side by side across the long bridge step by step, chatting as they walked. The female knight smiled and pointed to a tower in the right corner of the castle. I'm really sorry. I know you're busy and I didn't want to disturb you. However, Mr. Bartero, the magician enshrined in Loxy territory, has been in poor health recently and has decided to retire. A new replacement has not been found yet. The news has been leaked out again, so I can only ask you to tell me about it so that people who are interested can take a look. In this long sentence, Greet only heard the words "health is getting worse." As soon as the female knight finished speaking, he asked, "What is it? Call a doctor. Has the priest seen it?" "Elderwood and the archbishop have seen it." Selina smiled softly and sadly. "Your Excellency, Bartlow has no serious illness, but he is old. Originally, he was also my mother's mentor, and he is almost 100 years old this year." Greet sighed and stopped giving any more ideas. There are many diseases in the world, and with the advancement of medicine, it is possible to treat them. However, there is no way to treat old diseases. As we get older and older, our resilience becomes weaker and weaker, and we cannot withstand any surgeries or major or minor illnesses. In the end, even if we don't have any illnesses and just stay well, we will suffer from multiple organ failure. He just asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No need for now. All you need to do is show up at the dance and make people notice you. By the way, if it's convenient, can you invite me to dance?" "Huh? Hee hee. Greet drifted away silently, taking Bernard with her to find a place to eat. It is impossible to dance, it is impossible to dance in this life. He will not dance. Most of the guests Selina invited were nobles, and Gretel basically didn't know them. He walked around and only went to say hello to Master Tolga and his daughter Iris. The little girl was held in the hands of a young man, smiling happily. It was obvious that the famous beauty had already found a master, and now she came specially to support her best friend. Gretel was not good at making light bulbs, so after chatting for a few words, he excused himself and went to find a place to fill his stomach. It's still early spring, it's getting dark quickly, and the wind is biting by the lake. Not long after, the banquet hall was brightly lit, and a loud horn sound suddenly sounded at the gate of the castle. Woo buzz. For this sound, it was by no means one or two horns, at least four. Who is it, making such a big show before even showing up? Gretel looked out along with the guests. After a while, I saw four knights striding into the banquet hall door, standing in two rows facing each other. The old butler who had been greeting guests at the door rushed over immediately, cleared his throat and said in a loud voice, "The Earl of Inverness and his wife arrived. Baron Canage has arrived. Knight Hopman arrives." A series of titles were announced, and the crowd suddenly became commotion. Gretel didn't even need to activate the magic of ears and eyes, he could hear whispers everywhere. "The Earl has also arrived. Come and support your daughter? It's her 20th birthday party after all. Is it any wonder that the Countess also came with her? And her eldest son, Baron Canage, although he is 3 years younger than the Countess, is he also a knight now? By the way, who is Knight Hopman? Does anyone know him? It's rare. Ever since the Baroness moved to the territory, I remember her stepmother hasn't been here yet." The banquet hall was so noisy that even the sound of the band's performance was suppressed. The female knight Selina strode forward, hugged her father, and curtsied to her stepmother. The Earl of Inverness smiled and took his eldest daughter to the middle of the banquet hall, took a glass of wine from the waiter, and held it high. "Thank you all for coming to my little girl's birthday party." He talked non-stop for 2 minutes, then raised his glass to the left and right and drank it all in one gulp. Today's banquet was in the form of a buffet. Long tables had been set up along the wall. Upon seeing the Earl's signal, the waiters filed in and started serving the dishes one by one. Gretel was already a little hungry from waiting. He turned around and wanted to eat, but Aurora grabbed him. "Wait. We can eat after 3 dances." "But who should I dance with?" Gretel couldn't help but retort. "Among the women here, apart from the mistress, I only know one who is already married. Should I go up and invite you to dance?" "Never. I'm not asking you to jump. Stand by and watch. This is etiquette." "Etiquette. Greet cannot dance, but the master cannot." As the hostess of the banquet, Selina danced the first dance with her father, the Earl of Inverness, and the second dance with the Earl's heir, her eldest brother, Baron Canage. As the music changed, it became cheerful and lingering, and the crowd also fluctuated, looking left and right one by one, as if trying to find something in the crowd. "What are they looking at?" Gretel asked softly. Aurora shook her head, and so did Lynn. After a moment, behind the Countess, another young man they brought in stepped forward, with his left hand behind his back, his right hand elegantly stretched out, and he bowed slightly to the female knight. "Miss Selina, can I ask you to dance?" Selina took a cautious step back. The young man's face remained unchanged and he still smiled and said, "Miss Selina, I am the eldest son of Baron Hopman. I am 25 years old and a level 7 knight. I have been traveling before and just returned to my hometown. I am deeply impressed by your beauty and prowess. Could you please give me a chance? Let me ask you to dance." "Oh, it turned out to be a blind date." "Understood." Gretel looked away, suddenly feeling that something was wrong, and looked at the man intently. Knight Hopman is tall and slender to the point of appearing slightly thin. The 5 fingers of his right hand spread forward are slender and have distinct joints. If those hands were used to play the piano, I think they would be very suitable. Greet watched and subconsciously walked forward step by step, almost reaching the outside of the crowd. Aurora quickly grabbed him. "What are you doing?" "Ah!" Gretel had not yet recovered, his eyes were fixed on Knight Hopman, and he responded blankly. Aurora quickly pulled him back and whispered. "This is not the time to intercept you. The Countess brought me here." Guess what Gretel saw? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @Kingping's Highway for the 100 starting coins. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 304. Greet finally came to his senses, and followed Aurora's force and took 2 steps back. In the center of the crowd, the female knight Selina was smiling, but did not nod or shake her head. Instead, she turned to the Earl of Inverness. "Father, I have the right to choose my own dance partner, right?" Of course," the Count nodded. "He looks about 35 or 16 years old, has a straight military uniform, and has deep lines in the middle of his thick black eyebrows." Facing his daughter's question, he frowned slightly, but finally gave an affirmative answer. "My daughter, you have the right to choose your dance partner at any time. However, the boy from the Hopman family is quite good. A 25-year-old 7th level knight is worthy of you. Do you want to consider it?" He glanced at his wife as he spoke. The Countess immediately answered. "Yes, Celine. This child is my nephew. It is no exaggeration to say that our whole family has watched him grow up. He is serious and hard-working, and his character is quite good. Goddess, you are already 20 years old, and I am like you when I was that old. I already married your father and gave birth to your younger brother." Selina maintained a dignified demeanor, folded her hands in front of her, and listened with a smile. Hearing this, the corners of his mouth turned up slightly, he laughed out loud, and leaned towards his stepmother. "Yes." Then something was whispered in a low voice. Greet could not hear clearly from a distance, but he only knew that it was definitely not a good word. He saw the Countess' face suddenly turn red, then turn blue, and then turn white again. "Don't faint, right?" Fortunately, after a while, the Countess's expression softened again. Gretel stopped and stood there, not moving any closer. The female knight glanced sideways at Knight Hopman, raised her head, and walked straight ahead past him. Immediately, several young nobles stood up. "Miss Selina, can I ask you to dance?" "Your Majesty, may I ask you to dance?" "Beautiful lady." The female knight glanced at Gretel lightly, and saw that he was standing quietly in the crowd with no intention of coming out, so she smiled softly. She stretched out her hand and put it on the hand of the one closest to her among the men who looked okay. "My pleasure, Mr. Pierre." Her steps were light and her skirts were flying. After the song was danced, a lucky person was changed and danced again. Knight Hopman stood next to the Countess, his face getting darker and darker, and his eyes glaring at the female knight's dance partner were about to burst into flames. The third dance ended, and Selina excused herself to change clothes and exit to rest. For a while, everyone was dancing in 2s and 3s. Gretel wanted to get closer and take a closer look at Baron Hopman, but Master Lin grabbed him and dragged him to the corner. "What are you doing? You didn't see that guy was about to explode. Others can't even hide, but you're taking the initiative to move forward. Be careful he takes it out on you." "How else can he take it out on me?" Gretel was a little dissatisfied. "I didn't recruit him, I didn't provoke him, I just walked near him. This banquet hall doesn't belong to him, what else can he do to me?" The two of them huddled in the corner and stared at each other. "You can't convince me, and I can't convince you." During the stalemate, I suddenly heard a roar from the center of the dance floor. "Pierre, I want to duel you." Greet immediately followed the sound. Oh, that Knight Hopman had a dark face and was looking menacingly at the young nobleman who was the first to dance with the hostess. Between the two of them, there was a white glove thrown on the floor. It was shiny with silver and seemed to have many patterns embroidered on it. Look, Lin took the opportunity to teach Gretel. If I hadn't stopped you, you would have been the unlucky one. Tisk, I remembered this Hopman. The spider swordsmanship inherited from their family is very weird. It is said that it can be challenged to a higher level. His opponent will suffer, too. I wonder if Our Lady will come forward. In a few words the duel has begun. Knight Hopman's swordsmanship is indeed, as Lin said, quite strange. Several times, he was unexpected and stabbed from absolutely impossible angles. Gretel was amazed when he saw it. Is this spider swordsmanship? Yes. It is said that several generations ago, an ancestor of their family once went deep into the underground. When he came back, he had a special bloodline. It is said that he had in-depth communication with the demon god underground Lin and talked about the gossip with gusto and said with great enthusiasm. The people in their family have very long hands and feet, and long fingers. Therefore, when using swords, they can often use sword moves that others cannot use. However, their bodies are relatively weak, so their moves are mainly weird and quick, and they are not very capable. It's hard to fight head-on with others, and it's hard to produce high-level knights. Sounds a bit like something he's familiar with? Greed perked up her ears. Seeing that he was particularly interested, Lin En became more interested. And it is said that the bloodline of the demon god has been cursed, and people often die suddenly in their prime. So the legend is true? Their family has spider blood. Aurora also came up curiously and asked. Greed is concerned about another aspect. You said their hands and feet are very long? How long? Can the hands pass the knees? Can the thumbs be stretched across the palms, and can half of the knuckles be extended? I really don't know this. Master Lin En scratched his head. He had also heard gossip from others, but he had never confirmed it with his own eyes. The two looked at each other and moved towards the battle group in small steps. Aurora whispered from behind. Hey, did you agree not to come over? Greed turned back and winked at him. Just as he was about to answer, an angry shout sounded from the second floor of the banquet hall. Hopman! You've gone too far. The sword roared loudly. The female knight had an angry look on her face. She was dressed in pure black and looked like a female leopard, and she swooped down from the railing on the second floor. Before the person even landed, a sharp sword light was already swung out from his hand, and Knight Hopman's long sword was swung out with just one move. Miss Selena, do you want to protect this guy? Knight Hopman's face was filled with anger. He suddenly rolled his eyes, as if he thought of something, and forced a smile. Okay. I remember, miss, you once said that you will only devote yourself to the warrior who defeats you. So, if I can defeat you in 1.5 moves, can you grant me a date? Hopman, shouted the Earl of Inverness. Knight Hopman turned back to smile at him and bowed. Your Excellency, I just want a chance to pursue the young lady. Please rest assured that I am completely in love with the young lady and will never hurt her. In this way, as long as a little blood is seen on the young lady, I will lose and I will never see her again. How? The Earl of Inverness thought for a moment and was about to speak when he was pulled back by the Countess. Behind Knight Hopman, there was another old priest whose robe was embroidered with silver, and he stood up quietly. Don't worry, Lord Count. My great-nephew will be measured in his actions. Even if your wife is a little unable to hold back, with me here, you don't have to worry about my boy being seriously injured and irreparable. The Earl of Inverness stopped talking. Knight Hopman already had a slightly proud smile on his face and turned to the female knight, holding the sword lightly in his hand. How about it, Miss Selena? Let's give it a try. If you don't want to, I will never force you to do anything. I just hope you can dance with me. No need to say more, come on. Two long swords clashed. Gretel immediately quickened his pace and rushed to the front. However, the two 7th-level knights fought at high speed, and a ball of light golden light and a ball of silver light rolled from the center of the banquet hall to the door, and then from the door to the square outside the door. With Gretel's eyesight, he couldn't see anything clearly. There was a sudden sound of swords, and in the battle group, Miss Selina let out an ouch. The proud laughter of Knight Hopman followed. "Miss, please stop. I would rather dance with you than fight with you. Stop. Come again." The female knight rushed forward again. The two continued to fight fiercely. The pale golden sword light in the female knight's hand suddenly surged and then became silent, but she still failed to break through the opponent's sword net. 5 or 6 minutes later, there was another exclamation of "Oh," and a piece of black cloth fluttered, flew down from the skirt of the female knight's clothes, and plummeted to the ground. "Ah! Careful! Miss, be careful!" the bystanders exclaimed again and again. Someone even yelled irritably, "Hopman, you are not human. You bully a lady like this. Miss, stand down and let me do it." This sentence seemed to explode a powder keg. Most of the people who came to the ball were guests invited by Miss Selina, or the male and female companions brought by the guests. They are generally younger and less powerful, and their tempers are much more irritable than those of older people. As Knight Hopman was busy fighting, all kinds of shouts, curses, and even obscene words came out. "Shut up," Knight Hopman shouted angrily. He jumped backwards, swung his long sword, and a bloody sword light came out of his hand, creating a 3-foot deep and 6-7-foot long crack at the feet of the two people in front. He raised his sword and pointed it at the crowd. "Whoever curses another word will have a duel with him after I finish this fight." There was a sudden silence in the square. Gretel's eyes lit up. He saw it clearly. Knight Hopman is indeed very tall, estimated to be 2 meters tall and thin. The fingers of the hand holding the sword are indeed unusually long. After holding the hilt of the sword, the second knuckle of the middle finger can be pressed against it. As for his left hand, the left hand hanging by his side, although it did not reach as far as the knee, it almost touched the knee. The people in the family have very long hands and feet, and long fingers, and are not very good at confronting others. Someone often dies suddenly. Gretel's mind was racing, and the answer was already coming out. In the square, the two sides continued to fight. After a while, Selina said "oops" again, and she didn't know where she was scratched. Gretel was nervous for a while and shouted, "Selina, be careful. Either hold him back long enough, or use your ultimate move to force him. Fight him head on. It's useless. He's a man, and he must be stronger than Selina. He can't be touched," Aurora beside her whispered. Greet shook his head and also lowered his voice. "It's useful. There is a hereditary disease in his family. His strength is one level lower than that of ordinary people. He cannot withstand strenuous exercise and dare not confront others. If he is touched too much, he will die suddenly." The two people stood side by side, staring at the field without blinking, and neither of them noticed the spectators. Seeing the female knight retreating steadily, a loud voice suddenly sounded 2 or 3 steps away. "Miss Selina, just touch him. There is a hereditary disease in his family, so he doesn't dare to touch anyone head on. If he touches too much, he will die suddenly." Zheng. The sword light suddenly turned around. Although there are no updates, this chapter still has 3,000 words written. Praise me. Also, my book friend at from the previous chapter, The Blackened Army Rabbit is great. You almost guessed it right? Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. Asking for all kinds of things. I ordered a Gyulu and a Cao Yulu online, hoping to feed. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Giolan 2020. Chapter 305. Gretel stepped aside subconsciously. The sword light did not come towards him, but passed him by and pointed behind him. The crowd rolled and fell away, and a man in brocade clothes fell to the ground, with a sword pointed directly at his throat. This person seems familiar. Was he one of Miss Selena's dance partners just now? Greet wasn't so sure. He dragged Aurora and followed the crowd, stepping aside in small steps. Baron Hopman was condescending, pointed his sword directly at the throat of the man in robes, and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The man's face is earthy. He hid in the crowd. He originally thought that Baron Hopman could not find him, or even if he found him, he would not leave the battle immediately and run directly to him. Unexpectedly, just as he finished shouting, the sword light was fierce and it was already pressed to the throat. He fell to the ground, put his hands behind his back, and squirmed backwards. Once, twice, Spider Baron showed no intention of relaxing. He sent the long sword forward, and the tip of the sword gently sank into the skin of his throat. "Get out of here. I'm going to fight you." A trickle of blood ran down the middle of his throat. The man in brocade trembled all over, suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at Greet beside him. "I didn't say it first. It was him. It was him. Go find him." Baron Hopman turned his head suddenly. Gretel stood quietly 5 steps away, his face calm and half surprised. The Baron looked at the young mage up and down. After a moment, he asked in a low voice, "Did you say that?" Gretel opened his mouth to speak. Before the words left his mouth, he suddenly said, "Oops." A sword light came right up to the eyebrows. Gretel reflexively took a step back. The mage's armor shattered silently half a foot away from his eyes, and a translucent force field barrier rose from the ground. It was the automatic protection triggered by the endless ink pen, which firmly protected him at the critical moment. On the other side of the barrier, Knight Hopman looked ferocious. He raised his sword straight and pointed it squarely at the center of Gretel's eyebrows, with murderous intent in his eyes. "Take your words back. Either take them back, or if you dare to insult my family, fight me in a duel." Greet's heart was pounding, and she was covered in cold sweat. The sword just now was aimed directly at his vital points. "It's not a warning, it's not a warning, it's just that I want to kill him. His mage armor has been shattered. If the endless ink pen hadn't popped up the force field barrier in time, he would be dead now. Since time travel, this is the closest he has been to death. You want to kill me?" He gritted his teeth and stared at the other person, trying not to let his voice tremble. Aurora on the left, Lynn on the right, the two friends leaned over and stood side by side with him. 2 shields rose at the same time, spliced to the left and right of the force field barrier, like a pair of spread wings. Across the force field barrier, Knight Hopman glared at Gretel fiercely. This time, he really had murderous intentions. Unlike before, the first duel was just to find trouble and beat someone up. The second fight was more about forcing Miss Selena to accept his pursuit. This time, he wanted to kill from the bottom of his heart. "Get rid of this talkative mage. How dare you insult your family's bloodline? Insulting the bloodline that their family relies on to make the most of spider sword technique. Long hands, long legs, and extraordinarily slender fingers are all gifts given to them by God and are proof of their noble bloodline." This mage actually talked nonsense, saying that this was a disease, and that if he couldn't bear strenuous exercise, he would die suddenly. How can it be? Those who maliciously attack the family must be killed if possible. But not now. The other party is a mage. A mage who talks about their family is much more effective than the nonsense of a certain noble. The top priority is to get him to take his words back. He took 2 deep breaths, his wrist sank slightly, the tip of the sword was raised, and he aimed it at Gretel's eyebrows. "Take back your words. Your words have insulted the blood of our family. Either take it back, or this kind of hatred can only be washed away with blood." Greet's face slowly darkened. He had seen through the Hoffman family's hereditary disease and had no intention of making a fuss about it. If Baron Hoffman came to him in private and asked him to keep it secret with kind words, he would certainly agree. It was also the doctor's duty to keep the patient's confidentiality secret. But that guy wants to kill him. Someone else yelled it, but that guy wanted to kill him. After one attack failed, he used the sword to force him again, and ordered him to take it back in public. What do you take me for? A disease is a disease, and a hereditary disease is a hereditary disease. Even if you beat me up, or even kill me, it is impossible to become disease-free. Gretel twisted her face bitterly. If you can, just have a fight and let me turn the black into white. No way. You want to duel with me? I'm a magician. What happened to the magician? Don't worry, I will duel with you and abide by your magician's rules. Knight Hoffman gritted his teeth and sneered. His eyes fell on Gretel, a third-level magician and a fourth-level arcanist. The research level may be high, but the personal combat power is there. He will definitely win this duel. Magician's rules? What is that? Gretel was a little confused, and subconsciously turned to Aurora, casting a questioning look. On the right, Selena has already rushed over with her sword in hand, sneering. Duel with a magician. If you duel with him, you have to face all his followers, familiars and summons at the same time. Are you sure? I'm sure. Knight Hoffman's eyes were firm. In the surrounding area, he recognized almost every magician who came from a noble or mage family, without the support of family power, who could afford to have followers. Even if you rely on your high research level and the teacher's favor, you will only have a few magic equipment at most. The equipment that can trigger the protective barrier just now has been forced out once. As for the magic pet that a level 3 mage can bring, limited by the mage's financial resources and level, it's basically a joke. Knight Hoffman was full of confidence, but what Greet heard here was Selena's intentional reminder. He immediately felt relieved, nodded to the female knight to express his gratitude, looked at Knight Hoffman, and sighed helplessly. Really want to duel? Certainly. Is it okay not to duel? You have already fought twice. If you fight one more, I'm afraid your heart won't be able to bear it and you will die suddenly. Shut up, Knight Hoffman shouted angrily. He had originally thought that if Gretel really refused to duel and a high-level mage intervened to stop him, then he would put forward a painful compensation condition. That's not necessary now. If you are really afraid of death and refuse to duel, then you will be punished according to the rules of the nobility. You have insulted our family and our noble blood. You must walk barefoot from here to the family castle and be whipped at the gate of the castle. Oh! Is this a slap in the face? Gretel was also angry. I stopped you with good intentions, because I was afraid that you would die suddenly, and you would be justified in the medical trouble. He took a step with a cold face. I accept the duel. When? Where? Seeing that the two sides were getting more and more angry, especially since the duel involved a magician, several noble people finally walked out of the crowd of spectators. The old priest who accompanied Knight Hoffman was his great-uncle. Archmage Tolga, who accompanied his daughter to the ball. Earl of Inverness. Several people stood together to discuss for a while, and then a guard blew the horn and loudly announced the verdict. One Knight Hoffman claimed that the Nordmark mage had insulted his family. Based on noble privilege, Knight Hoffman had the right to demand a duel. 2. The Nordmark mage agrees to the duel. The duel will be conducted in accordance with the magician rules promulgated by the Parliament. The Nordmark mage has the right to bring followers, familiars and summons. The knight is not allowed to ride a mount, and the magician is not allowed to fly. 3. The duel takes place at this time and here, in the square at the entrance of the castle. The two sides are 100 steps apart. Only after the witness calls out can you launch an attack or release a spell. 4. The Earl of Inverness, Master Tolger and Reverend Farron served as witnesses, and other nobles present served as circumstantial evidence. 5. Both sides have reached the point. After one side falls to the ground and admits defeat, the other side cannot maliciously kill. After finishing speaking, the guard blew the horn again. When the trumpet sound ended, 4 guards with loud voices stood in a row and shouted in unison. Duelists from both sides are invited to enter. Duelists from both sides are invited to enter. Hopman Knight entered the field first. Gretel stood still and shouted, "Bernard! Coming!" The barbarians rushed over like a rock. He grabbed a roasted leg of lamb with one hand, bit off the last bite of the meat, and threw it away. The other greasy hand grasped the big bone stick that he had repaired. The bone club was raised high over his right shoulder. The man and the club were as tall as 2 knights of Hopman. The knight's eyes immediately straightened. Immediately afterwards, he saw Aurora with a cold face, following Gretel into the arena. The badge on the chest shines brightly, with 5 bronze stars flashing silently. A 5th-level magician. Knight Hopman began to have a headache. Judging from the pace, breathing, muscles, and weight of weapons, that barbarian was probably a warrior of the same level as him, plus a 5th-level magician. It was by no means 1 + 1 = 2. However, do you want to admit defeat? Call for an end to the duel? Absolutely impossible. The little mage blamed their family lineage and said that people in their family would die suddenly from generation to generation. Once he said this, he would not stop dying. Either kill him or beat him to silence. Damn it, how could a little magician have 1 magic, 1 battle, and 2 followers? The level of the 2 followers is higher than him. Who is behind this little guy? Who is it? He turned his expectant eyes to his great-uncle. And his uncle, Pastor Farron, lived up to his expectations and asked with a stern face, "Are those 2 people really his followers? Aren't they just friends pretending to be friends?" "Are you kidding?" Master Tolga happily continued. "Which person, especially a magician, is willing to pretend to be someone else's follower?" The barbarian was given by the little guy's teacher, and the blonde magician was his mentor. Carlyle is in charge. Go to Thunder Tower and ask around. There are definitely many people who know about this. The old priest stopped talking. Knight Hopman's eyes dimmed for a moment, then he suddenly raised his head and shouted loudly, "You forced me to do this." He returned the sword to its sheath and took out a long sword from his pocket. As soon as the new sword was revealed, there was a burst of surprised murmurs among the crowd. Selena's eyes were shocked and she immediately shouted, "Gretel! Be careful! That is their famous sword Bloody Dawn, which can store the full blow of a high-ranking knight. High-level knights are knights above level 10. Recalling the last battle against the Lord of Glory, when he faced the 9th-level knight, Greed was shocked and immediately began to take things out of the space bag. Check out the same as Aurora. Did you bring the purple scalestone? Yes. What about the nitrocellulose? Did you bring it? How many packs? Only 3 packs? That's not enough. I'll give you this bag." Knight Hopman clenched his sword and moved forward step by step. This Bloody Dawn not only seals the sword energy, but also greatly enhances his strength and speed. With it, supplemented by the family's spider swordsmanship, the opponent can even fight to a draw with a level 8 knight, and even a level 9 knight can injure the opponent unexpectedly. "Duelists on both sides, are you ready?" the old priest shouted quickly when he saw that Greed was still taking out money. Before Greed could speak, his right shoulder suddenly sank, and a furry thing rolled up and touched his left ear. Meow. There was another commotion on the sidelines. Under Gretel's surprised gaze, Master Lin An straightened his black robe, and with a stern expression on his face that had not changed for thousands of years, he slowly stepped into the duel field. "Starting today, for 3 consecutive days, I will pay off my debt with 6,000 words every day. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, Ask for book reviews. Asking for various. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 306. Chapter 306, Gretel asked you to die in the third update. Jan Gyron will reward you with 10,000 rewards and add one more update. You. Why are you too? Knight Hopman's voice almost broke. Master Lin An looked at him indifferently and opened the space bag. I now live in his mage tower. With a flick of his fingertips, a string of golden lights flew out of the bag, connected head to tail. Then, everyone saw that the toes were connected to the tibia was connected to the femur, and the femur was connected to the pelvis. Bones built themselves up one by one. Finally, the golden skeleton bent down and picked up his head, pressed it on the top of the neck bone, and rocked it back and forth to test the firmness. In his eyes, 2 dots of fire flickered, as if he were smiling. Hopman Knight. Female Knight Selena. The Earl and Countess of Inverness. Only Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. He knew what Master Lin An was capable of. He had experienced hundreds of battles and could fight much better than the two of them. With him here, we will never be bullied by others because of our lack of combat experience. You know, Master Lin An has dealt with the Lord of Glory Knight before, but he once killed someone 2 levels higher. He clapped his hands. Do you want to continue the duel? Single fight, or group fight? In a one-on-one fight, you will fight us all alone. In a group fight, we will fight in a group fight against you. The strength comparison between the two sides was like this. If they were to change places, Greed would probably give up immediately. A duel is not a life or death fight, where you have no choice but to apologize, or even if you don't apologize, just be thick-skinned and stop it immediately. No matter what, it's better than getting a beating. The problem is that the other party obviously doesn't think so. There was a roar from the opposite side, and the Hopman Knight had already launched a charge. Fighting roll versus magic roll, getting close as quickly as possible is the only way to win. Gretel pinched a tube of potassium permanganate, and just when he was concentrating, he heard Master Lin An give an urgent order. Oro, blessing. Gretel, protection. As he spoke, a faint light flickered in his hand, and he pointed forward. The bone prison rises from the ground and stands in the direction from which Knight Hopman is charging. At the same time, Mr. Trochka jumped out, growing in size and transforming into a panther in mid-air. Lin's hands flew up, and the blessing spells fell on it one by one, making the short hairs on the leopard's body glow with a faint metallic luster. Aurora's reaction was slower than him. Fortunately, his level was right there, and his casting speed was fast enough. Bear's tenacity, barbarian power, and cat's lightness were thrown on Bernard one by one. The barbarian roared, and his already burly figure swelled in size before his eyes, and he rushed forward waving his big bone club. Boom! There was an explosion between the knight's sword and the bone club. Bernard took 1 step back, and Knight Hopman took 3 steps back, made a light circle, and pounced to the left. Before he could cross the center line, a deep roar rang out, and the Black Panther opened its sharp teeth and bit into his knees. Gretel was busy opening shields for the 3 of his own party. After the 3 shield spells were activated, I looked up again and saw that they were already fighting in a ball 50 steps away. Bernard's strength was heavy, the Black Panther's agility, and a golden skeleton surrounded him from 3 sides, forcing Knight Hopman to be unable to overtake him even a step. It seems to be stable? Greed blinked. He moved closer to Lin An and whispered. Can we ask him to surrender? If we fight for a long time, he may die. Lin gave him a hard look. Seeing Greed's confused look, he endured it, and finally resisted the urge to hit him on the head, and let out a long sigh. "Why are you talking so much? When you say something like this, can you pay attention to your surroundings or put up a noise barrier? Look, you are in trouble. If others listen, if others shout out, you will be the one to take responsibility." Gretel's head dropped lower and lower as he scolded him. Thinking about it carefully, it is true that he drifted. This period of time has been too smooth. If you want to have a mage tower and do public health, you can convince the nobles and wealthy businessmen. It is a bit complacent. Absolutely no, 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 even the basic principle of confidentiality has been thrown away. In the previous life, in the hospital, in corridors, elevators, and in public places, we were not allowed to discuss the patient's condition. He lowered his head and said, "Brother Lin, it was my fault. I will never do this again. Is there any way to make him stop? If he continues to fight like this, he may die suddenly. I'll give it a try." Seeing that he said it solemnly, Lin also sighed and switched from Greet's right to the left. The great uncle, who took a few steps outside and looked at Knight Hopman in the distance, raised his voice. "Your Excellency, Pastor, can this duel be considered a draw? We have no ill intentions. You see, even your grandnephew can't attack Dash." Pastor Farron's face was gloomy. To be honest, he had been away from home for many years. Apart from receiving support from the family and helping to send a few people into the church, he had not much contact with the family, and he rarely met his grandnephew. That is to say, he had recently become old and frail and returned to his family to take care of his old age. Only then was he asked by Baron Hopman to take care of his son at the banquet. Taking care of him, he started fighting right before his eyes. I didn't think much of it at first. Isn't she just a girl? It doesn't matter if she has a stronger temper. A girl's marriage is not decided by her parents. The Countess has convinced the Earl of Inverness that there is nothing wrong with the man pursuing a tougher approach. Then, the little mage stood up. Pastor Farron didn't know Gretel, nor did he know his background. He arrested the eldest son of the Earl of Inverness and asked him. The answer he got was, "I don't know, he is definitely not a nobleman anyway, and I haven't heard who his mentor is. Sounds like a regular civilian." Pastor Farron was relieved. He really didn't expect that this little mage actually had followers, and each of them stood up and became more ruthless than the last. A third-level mage can have two fifth-level mage as followers. This background is simply unfathomable. Just when he was about to stand up and mediate a few words, forcing the other party to apologize, his grandnephew rashly attacked. "Damn it! I don't know who the other party is, don't you know too? Okay, stop. Stop," he added a loudspeaker to himself and tried to stop tremblingly. However, in the square, the Hopman knights were fighting 1 against 3, and they had no intention of paying attention to him. Knight Hopman really doesn't know Gretel's identity. He was recruited to participate in the battle against the Lord of Glory, and then he made a breakthrough and traveled around the kingdom for a whole year. What characters emerged from Nevis this year? Unless a mage is promoted to level 15 or above, otherwise, I don't know. Knight Hopman had just returned home a week ago. He was shocked to see the female knight Selena on the way. Then, his whole mind focused on pestering his father to help him propose marriage. What's worse is that because of his previous behavior, no one here except the Countess was willing to remind or warn him. The Countess herself naturally felt that greed would give in. By the time the opponent's followers came forward one by one, Knight Hopman was already in a difficult position and had no choice but to rush forward. Fortunately, he is a real 7th level knight, and he is a 7th level knight who has fought with sword and gun on the battlefield and during adventures. Now one was fighting 3 against each other. Although the situation was tight, he was confident that he could make a comeback. 3, 2, 1. The movement of the barbarian's hand suddenly slowed down, and the force of the bone club's impact also weakened a bit. The duration of the magic blessing is over. The time this kind of magic provides blessings to people is calculated in minutes. It's now. What he has been waiting for is the moment when the blessing period ends and the other party changes from prosperity to decline. Knight Hopman's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He held the sword with both hands and used all his strength to activate the sword energy. A bloody brilliance flashed out, overwhelming the sky and heading straight towards the barbarians. Bloody morning glow, this famous sword passed down by the family contains the full blow of the high-ranking knight. Tide of blood. The barbarian's face and eyes were all stained red with blood, and the corners of his eyes were even bursting with blood. It was obvious that he had entered a violent state. Instead of retreating, he advanced, the veins in his arms were exposed, and he used all his strength to hold the bone club tightly. Dash! A roar shook all directions. Gretel's ears were ringing, and the old priest's shouts at the edge of the duel were also covered up. There was only one other roar, which sounded at the same time as the barbarians. Ouch! A shadow of a strange beast that looks like a dragon but not a dragon, looks like a snake but not a snake, leaps out from the bone stick. It was obvious that the Alchemy Guild had worked really hard to repair the bone rod before and found a high-grade beast soul for him to seal into the bone rod. Now the beast's soul faced the sword energy. Although it was at a disadvantage, it was not chopped into pieces for a while. Seizing this opportunity, Mr. Trochka let out a loud roar, raised his claws, and waved out 8 claw winds. Although the golden skeleton couldn't make a sound, it still rushed forward and swung its sword towards the sword energy. The three of them worked together to achieve a balance of power in an instant. The sword energy and the beast's soul creaked and grinded against each other, sparks almost bursting out. But everyone can see it clearly, the barbarian bows and bends his knees, plowing 2 deep ditches under his feet, his arms are shaking violently, and he can't stand it for much longer. Back up, Greed held the test tube tightly and ran forward. The next moment, Bernard spurted blood and fell to the ground, the Black Panther whined and shrank into a kitten as big as a palm, and the golden skeleton. The golden skull collapsed with a crash. The skull, spine, ribs, and limbs fell to the ground with a crash, and the sword energy passed above the head. The sword energy roared. With his eyes spitting fire, Knight Hopman passed over the 3 fallen warriors and headed straight for Gretel. He didn't even swing another sword at the barbarian. Bloody Dawn, the power of this sword is running out, every bit, every ounce must be used on the magician. Then, he saw 3 magicians standing side by side, pointing their fingertips at him, or raising their palms towards him. Fireball technique. Fireball technique. Blazing sphere. 1 big and 2 small, 3 fireballs flew at the same time. It's just a fireball technique. Knight Hopman sneered, even if there is no stored sword energy, my sword energy is enough to crush these fireballs. He guided the sword light and made a stroke with all his might. The fireballs on both sides flew faster, but the flaming balls were slower. The sword light passed through the arc, covering them all. However, the next moment, 3 fireballs exploded at the same time, and the 3 rings of unprecedented blazing air waves were squeezed toward the center. Not good. Knight Hopman's hair stood on end. The bloody sword light only lasted for half a second before silently shattering. Next, all he could rely on was his own sword energy. As a 7th level knight, he had cultivated his sword energy for many years. Hopman waved his sword obliviously. Left, front, right, be sure to guard against it. Work harder, get faster, and get stronger with your sword. This moment lasted like 10,000 years. The air wave finally disappeared, and several overlapping shields had been erected in front of them. It was obvious that they could not be broken in a moment. Behind the shield, the little mage in the middle shouted again. Bernard. The roar of the savage and the roar of the Black Panther came at the same time, directly attacking his back. Hoffman turned around with his sword. The next moment, he felt a pain in his heart and his whole body fell down weakly. 3,000 words. Today's 6,000 words, the first extra update with 10,000 rewards is over. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 307. Greet's forehead buzzed. Marfan syndrome. Greet has determined this through family history and repeated observations. After strenuous exercise, the patient covers his chest with his hands, looks in pain, and falls to the ground. There is a high probability that it is a cardiovascular disease attack. You know, most patients with Marfan syndrome have congenital cardiovascular malformations. He jumped up and ran towards the patient. While running, I was mentally making orders. Angina. Acute myocardial infarction. Cardiogenic shock. Or worse. In any case, if it is just a severe arrhythmia or cardiac arrest, as long as cardiopulmonary resuscitation is performed immediately, many people can be saved. His eyes were fixed on Knight Hoffman without blinking. The knight fell to the ground and curled up into a ball, unable to see whether his chest was rising or falling. Are you breathing? Are your lips cyanotic? Have a cold sweat? It's too far. You can't see clearly at this distance. You need to get closer. After running a few steps, his left and right arms were already tense at the same time. Lynn is on the left and Aurora is on the right. One of them grabbed one of his hands and dragged him back hard. What are you doing? Let me go. I want to save him. If he doesn't save him, he will die soon. What does dying have to do with you? Lynn could not wait to cover Gretel's mouth. He simply stood in front of Greet, put his hands on his shoulders, and pushed him back forcefully. While pushing, he leaned forward, stared into Gretel's eyes and growled. You didn't kill him even if he died. He asked for the duel himself. You stopped as soon as he fell. The three of us, Bernard, and my two magic pets, no one hurt him. Just after shouting these few words, a person rushed past beside the duel field. The old man's beard was almost completely white. He ran very fast and reached Knight Hoffman in the blink of an eye. He knelt down on his knees, closed his eyes and prayed for a moment, and then a white light fell on the knight. It was the great-uncle of Knight Hoffman. Although the old man is old, his priest level is still good. The three silver edges on the corners of his robe are shining brightly. He is clearly an 8th level priest. As soon as Gretel's steps slowed down, the old man turned his head and yelled at him. What are you here for? Do you want to continue to harm him? Get out. Gretel paused. A level 8 priest is really strong, he should be able to cure it, right? But sudden cardiac death is still very dangerous. Without resuscitation, if the heart can't beat again, I don't know how long it can last with treatment alone. The old man only prayed, and I didn't see him doing any extra cardiac compressions or anything like that. I'll go take a look, take a look. Gretel hesitantly tried to take a step. Lin En pulled him again. What else do you want to do? Are you sure you can save him? In an instant, Greet's whole body strength was exhausted, and his shoulders slumped feebly. Not sure. Really not sure. Without electrocardiogram, echocardiography, MRI, cardiac catheterization, and aortography, he couldn't even determine what the patient's disease was. The cardiovascular malformations of Marfan syndrome are so bizarre that they can basically be regarded as a complete encyclopedia of cardiovascular diseases. Progressive dilation of the aorta, aortic valve regurgitation, aortic sinus aneurysm, dissecting aneurysm and rupture, mitral valve prolapse, mitral valve insufficiency, tricuspid valve insufficiency, congenital atrial septal defect, ventricular septal defect, tetralogy of Fallot, patent ductus arteriosus, Coarctation of the aorta. If you are really unlucky and encounter a burst aortic aneurysm or aortic dissection and tear, haha. Even in a hospital emergency department with complete rescue equipment, if a person falls and is rushed to the operating room immediately, there is a high probability that the person will not be able to be saved. Aortic rupture is so dangerous. Not to mention that in this foreign world, there is physical monitoring but no physical monitoring, extracorporeal circulation but no extracorporeal circulation. Even if you want a blood transfusion, there is no place to give it to the patient. Without diamonds, there's no way you can get a porcelain job. If you're not sure, transfer to another hospital. You don't even know how to transfer. Why did a good person die? You interfered, and the patient's family will sue you if he dies. If you don't touch him, if he dies, it has nothing to do with you. Are you stupid? The various scoldings and roars he had heard in his previous life for more than 10 years echoed in Gretel's ears again. He dropped his arms, lowered his head, and let out a long, silent sigh. As a doctor, he also wants to save the patient's life whenever possible. But sometimes, due to various reasons, doctors can only choose to protect themselves. And those patients are often not even part of the various causes. The treatment ahead continues. The old priest knelt on his knees, clasping his hands on his chest with a pious expression. White light fell on Knight Hopman again and again. Sometimes it was a straight beam, sometimes it was a soft rain of light, and sometimes it was a ball of light held in both hands, sinking into the knight's chest silently. Every time he fell down, Knight Hopman seemed to get better. Once he even struggled to sit up, but he fell down again just halfway up. A half circle of people gradually formed around him. The Countess was headed on one side, and the Archmage Tolga was the leader on the other side. They all looked solemn. Archmage Tolga was still secretly waving to Gretel and winking, telling him not to come over, stand far away, don't cause trouble. At the Archmage's signal, even the barbarian Bernard didn't dare to walk in a straight line. Together with the Black Cat and the Golden Skeleton, he stayed far away from the Hopman Knight and made a big circle to join Gretel. The group of people watched from a distance, and Lynn even gave extra instructions to the barbarian. Bernard, watch your boss. Don't let him pass. He still wants to kill that knight. Bernard responded gruffly, stood beside Greet, and put a big hand directly on Greet's shoulder. There was no need to exert any effort, just such a normal move, and Greet felt that his right shoulder collapsed completely. He raised his left hand with a wry smile. Okay, I promise I won't get there, can you let me go? I'm going to be crushed. You'd better remember your promise, Lynn snorted and waved to Bernard. Only then did the barbarian let go, still staring at Gretel unblinkingly, as if the boss would pick him up and run away if there was any movement. Greet could no longer care about him. 30 or 40 steps away, the treatment technique flashed faster and faster, but the patient showed no signs of improvement. When the manpower is exhausted, once the old priest's treatment skills are exhausted and the patient's condition still does not improve, I'm afraid. Do you think it can be cured? A somewhat distant voice asked. Greet raised his head slightly and saw Archmage Tolga holding his daughter and making a gesture to him. A long stream of wind, like a wisp, sent the sound directly to his ears, and several people around him were unaware of it. Gretel shook his head slightly. Although the people next to the Archmage most likely couldn't hear it, he habitually lowered his voice. It's hard to say, it depends on the cause of the disease. If you're lucky, you can save it, but if you're not lucky. If you are unlucky, the aortic aneurysm ruptures, or the aorta is torn, and the bleeding stops, blood transfusion is not stopped, and a section of artificial blood vessel is not replaced. What is the use of just using a therapeutic technique to hang it? As he talked, the old pastor was sweating profusely, shaking, and water was dripping from his hair and beard. Under the white light, Knight Hopman lay flat on the ground, his face was pale, and his lips had no color at all. It looked like he had lost too much blood. Broken aorta? It can't really be that big. The Countess looked pale. She took the Earl of Inverness' wrist and pulled it twice. She took a small crystal bottle from the Earl's hand and quickly drank it for the old priest. With the help of the potion, the old priest tried his best to cast a few more healing spells, but finally the oil ran out and he closed his eyes to gasp. He's going to die. Beside Gretel, Aurora and Lynn said in unison. Aurora stood on tiptoe slightly and looked forward, but Lynn's eyes were half closed, as if feeling the death aura of the other night. Gretel was silent, but the Countess had knelt down to test her nephew's breathing, and then lay on his chest to listen to his heartbeat. She let out a very sharp high note. Lifting up the hem of her skirt, she rushed towards Greet. "You killed him, you killed him. Madam, please pay attention to your manners." Selina immediately stood up in front of her stepmother. She took off her long sword and held it in the middle with the scabbard. The Countess immediately couldn't move forward even half a step. It was obvious that she had no strength value. She threw herself on the sword and tried to point it at Gretel. The sword was sharp and dripping with blood. "You killed my nephew. Killed the heir of the Hoffman family. The Hoffman family will not let you go." Gretel was speechless. He really disliked the behavior of Knight Hoffman. As much as he hated it, he didn't want anyone to die, nor did he want to provoke him into a duel with him, causing him to fall ill and die on the spot. "If I don't kill Borin, Borin will die because of me." He listened silently to the Countess's accusations, not wanting to reply even a word. Archmage Tolga was already furious. "Madam, please watch your words." Knight Hoffman suddenly fell to the ground in the middle of a legal duel and died. So many pairs of eyes were watching. As soon as he fell to the ground, the Nordmark mage stopped. No additional damage. "Earl of Inverness, do you agree with the legality of the duel?" The Earl of Inverness' face was as dark as water, and he dragged his wife behind him. As one of the witnesses of the duel, his existence is part of the legitimacy of the duel. Of the three witnesses, Pastor Farron represented the knight's side, and Archmage Tolga represented Gretel's side. As the highest-ranking nobleman in the locality and the father of the host of the banquet, he undoubtedly represented the owner of this place. As a landowner, he was supposed to uphold justice, but it was his wife who made trouble. Damn, that little beast was still teasing his daughter during the battle. If it weren't for his daughter's strong temper and her refusal to violate the knight's code, he would have ended up himself. "Shut up!" he shouted at his wife and turned to the public. "I witnessed that Knight Hoffman suddenly fell to the ground and died on his own in the middle of a legal duel. Master Nordmark did not commit any wrongdoing. No one may use this as a reason to accuse Master Nordmark or launch a lawsuit. Revenge. That won't stop someone from not following the rules." Archmage Tolga snorted beside him. Without waiting for the Count to react, he strode forward and pulled Greet. "Let's go. Follow me back to the city immediately. It will be safe when we reach the Mage Tower." "Emma, while I was writing, I was checking books. Writing about cardiogenic diseases made my own blood pressure rise. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. Thanks to @RedCometMars for the reward of 30,000 starting coins. Thanks to for the 500 starting coin reward. Thanks @0 half a bottle of wine 100 starting coins for the reward. What I haven't mentioned yet, I'll add 3 more to the 10,000 rewards. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 308. Archmage Tolga's mobility is truly resolute. A piece of flying equipment was thrown on the spot, which was the same dark cloud that Greet saw when he first met him. He pulled Greet directly onto the cloud. Lynn, Aurora, and Bernard filed forward. Mr. Troca meowed and jumped into Greet's arms, while the golden skeleton turned into a string of bone chains as usual and was put into the space bag by Master Lin. Archmage Tolga stamped his foot down, and dark clouds filled the air and rose from the ground. His move was indeed decisive. The next day, Baron Hauptmann himself received the news that his eldest son had died in a duel. What? Clayton is dead. The Baron exerted force on his hand, and the silver cup engraved with exquisite patterns was immediately crushed into a ball. The bright red wine gurgled out between the fingers, like blood between the fingers and even in the heart. He stared at the knight of the earldom standing upright in front of him, gritted his teeth, and his cheek muscles became tangled. Who did it? Who killed him? Knight David bowed slightly, stepped forward, and calmly handed over the Earl's personal letter. When the Baron took the letter, he took another step back and stood upright. From beginning to end, not a word was said. He was only 2 years younger than the Earl of Inverness. He received knightly education at the Earl's mansion and grew up with the Earl. Everyone in the earldom knows that he is the right-hand man of the current Earl. In some informal situations, he can almost represent the Earl himself. This time, it was also because the eldest son of an important in-law in the earldom and the lord of the neighboring territory died, so the Earl of Inverness sent him to come overnight with a letter. And Baron Hauptmann has not given up his seat, shown no courtesy, or even called him a name since they met. So Knight David kept his lips tightly shut. Baron Hauptmann read the letter at a glance, turned back to the first page with trembling hands, read it again, and then read it again. Finally, he raised his eyes, glared at Knight David, and said in a deep voice, "What do you mean, Lord Count? Your Majesty, the Earl, expresses deep condolences for the death of young Master Ling." Knight David bowed lightly, his tone was strict and extremely formal. "I would like to express my sincere condolences to the Baron and his lady. The Count said that on the day of your prince's funeral, he and his wife will definitely attend on time." Baron Hauptmann's anger grew even brighter. Although he has 3 sons, the second son is weak and the third son was sent to the Spring Temple to become a priest. Only the eldest son is the most accomplished and is already a level 7 knight at a young age. And now, this eldest son, who he had high hopes for, is dead. Died. And the Earl of Inverness actually refused to help him and began to take revenge on the person who killed his son. Where did that magician come from? He asked with suppressed anger. Knight David lowered his eyes slightly, then raised his eyes for a moment and looked directly at the Baron. In a moment, I had already organized my answer in my mind. He can be regarded as watching the eldest lady grow up. Knight Hauptmann dared to be rude to the eldest lady and deserved his death. Since that Nordmark mage stood up for the eldest lady and stood on the Earl's side, he should not be disturbed. Let me reveal a little about the little mage's background so that the Baron can be less delusional and not disturb the little mage. He is a guest invited by the lady. A 4th-level arcanist and a 3rd-level magician. During the duel, there were 2 5th-level magicians who claimed to be his followers. One of them is said to be a disciple of the Archmage. In addition, there is another, a barbarian follower whose combat level is suspected to be level 7. After the duel, a 13th-level great magician activated his flying magic weapon and took him and his followers away from the scene on the spot. The Baron drew a silent breath. According to the convention of the Magic Council, only magicians above level 10 can be called archmages. If the teacher of the 13th-level magician and the 5th-level magician are not the same person, it means that the murderer who killed his son has at least 2 great magicians standing behind him. And with the strength of the Baron, can it fight against the 2 great magicians? Baron Hauptmann knew without taking stock, absolutely impossible. In their barony, the highest combat power on the surface is himself, a 9th-level knight. The highest combat power secretly is an assassin taken in many years ago, level 7, in terms of legal power, the highest level is the old priest who has just returned. Level 8. 3 people tied together are not enough to beat one archmage. So what should I do now? Could it be that you just endure this tone? Knight David bowed and retired. Baron Hauptmann thought over and over again, but still couldn't make a decision. It wasn't until 2 days later that he heard another piece of bad news from Pastor Farron, who was escorting his eldest son's body. What? The little pastor said that our family's bloodline is a hereditary disease. He did say that. Pastor Farron burst into tears. There is no other way. We have to rely on our family for our retirement, and we must put aside our own responsibilities. Hundreds of people at the scene heard it. If it hadn't been like this, the young master wouldn't have insisted on dueling with him in order to protect the honor of the family. I can't persuade him at all. There's nothing I can do to persuade him. If I were 20 years younger, I would have such an old bone I went there myself. How could I let Clayton? Baron Hauptmann frowned. Now it is no longer a son's matter, but a family matter. What's worse is that in full view of the public, the son suddenly fell to the ground and died during the battle, which almost confirmed the other party's statement. If the words of this little mage spread, there will be huge problems in the family's marriages with foreign countries, or even the family sending their children to study elsewhere. What grudge does that little mage have against Clayton? With just one sentence, he will cut off the foundation of their family. If you could have endured it, or you could have tolerated it temporarily and allowed Su-Tu to take revenge, then now you can no longer bear it. Baron Hauptmann sat in his study all night. The next day, he went to Inverness in person and visited the Earl. On the 4th day, a letter passed through many people and was delivered to Gretel's mage tower. Master Tolga came personally to deliver the message. He took the coffee from Greet, stirred it with a spoon, and said with a wry smile, "Little Greet, how should I put it, someone asked me to ask you a favor." "Master, you're welcome." Gretel smiled sincerely. "You once invited me to join the School of Change. Although I didn't join, I have always been grateful for your friendship. If you have anything to say, just say it. As long as you can do it, I will definitely agree." Archmage Tolga breathed a sigh of relief. That Baron Hauptmann, didn't his son die? The Baron meant that his son died in a duel, and he didn't want to pursue it. Greet's face was slightly stagnant, but out of politeness, he did not retort. Archmage Tolga was also a little embarrassed to speak, but he was entrusted by others and had to say it in one breath. "The Baron hopes that you can attend his son's funeral, apologize in front of the guests, and take back what you said before." When Greet heard attend the funeral, she had already started to nod. However, after hearing the last sentence, his neck stiffened and he asked, "Which sentence?" "That's what you said, there is a hereditary disease in their family." Gretel lowered his head and pondered. Archmage Tolga persuaded him. "Little Greet, I know it's really difficult for a mage to retract his research conclusion. But no matter what, it's just a sentence. You are young, and if you say something wrong occasionally, others won't care. You see, their family very sincere." He pushed over a gift list, which was densely packed with at least 10 lines of gifts, starting with a certain amount of gold coins and a certain amount of silk. This gift was of great value, but Gretel didn't even look at it. He just lowered his head and whispered, "But this is true. But this sentence is related to their life and death. If this sentence spreads, no one in the noble circle will be willing to marry, which is equivalent to cutting off their livelihood. But this is the truth. The truth will not become a lie just because I deny it." Gretel suddenly raised his head. "Master Tolga, you said that if other families don't marry with them, it means they will be cut off from their livelihood. But if I declare that this statement is false, then those men and women who don't know anything and just marry with them, won't they? Is it like losing your way of life? It's not like we want them to have no heirs." After explaining the matter clearly, those who are still willing to marry can still marry. Find a lower-level nobleman with less favorable conditions. If you pay more, there is always a way. But by hiding the matter, Wouldn't it be equivalent to me helping them to cheat on their marriage? Archmage Tolga was speechless for a moment. He thought for a while and said seriously. But they also said that if you refuse to withdraw, they will file a complaint with the parliament, saying that you maliciously attacked their family and slandered their honor. Are you sure? There was deep concern in his tone. Greet's face suddenly darkened. Then let them come. The truth is the truth and will not turn out to be false. Your Excellency, Archmage, please send a message back for me. I cannot apologize, and please take back the gift. At most, I don't take the initiative to publicize their family's affairs on other occasions. If they really want to sue me for malicious slander, I will publish a paper in Arcana and explain the issue of genetic diseases clearly. This is not necessary. Archmage Tolga was in a hurry, with a wry smile on his face. Regardless of others, Gretel said that he would release Arcane, which was really not a threat. In just over a year, he has already published 2 Arcana articles, and it seems that it will not be difficult to publish another one. Once the genetic disease is published in Arcane, it will not only be known to a small number of nobles in a region, but to the entire kingdom, and even to the nobles on the opposite continent, it will become a household name within a few months. It's not like the Lord of Glory didn't secretly subscribe to Arcane and Magic. He sighed in annoyance, said goodbye, and left. Alas, no matter what, Greed promised not to publicize it to the outside world, so it can be considered that the communication has achieved results. However, Baron Hauptmann did not appreciate it. In other words, when a marriage was about to be concluded, the other party suddenly changed his mind, forcing him to intensify the pressure. Within a few days, Master Tolga came to visit Greet again. Little Greet, why don't you give in? You know, the Hauptmann family has always had a good relationship with the council. They are the ones who provide stable supplies to our alchemy guild for several goods. For example, the rubies from the southern Black Continent. Recently they announced that a ship did not arrive at the port and the rubies were out of stock. Is it troublesome? Greet asked with concern. The Archmage sighed. It's a big one, and the quality of the gems is pretty good. It can be kept in stock for a year. The trouble is the ruby powder, which is used to enchant the eternal flame. It is used in the largest amount. It seems that it only has a month's stock. The ship of the Congress to the New World haven't come back yet. A month? Greet's heart moved. Regarding the enchantment of ruby powder to create eternal flames, he had some ideas before, but he was too busy to implement them. Now that the other party has come to the door, it's time to give it a try. Your Excellency Archmage, please give me some time, maybe I can solve this problem. No matter what, I will not make things difficult for the Alchemist Guild. 3,000 words. Another 6,000 completed today. Another update completed. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 309. When Greed was so poor that he couldn't even afford a shadowless lamp, no, even 1/36th of a shadowless lamp, he once studied how to rub an inextinguishable flame by hand at a low cost. The research conclusion is that the reason why this thing is expensive is the enchantment. The reason why the enchantment is expensive is mainly because of the material. It requires ruby powder. This is too expensive. Ruby is something that the kingdom's local production can only bring tears to. If you want to use it in large quantities, you have to either smuggle it from the kingdoms under the rule of the glorious Holy See, or smuggle it from the Orc wilderness further away, or transport it from the southern Black Continent and the New World. The southern Black Continent is basically all in under the rule of the glorious Holy See. Greed couldn't figure it out even to the point of death. Why must rubies be used? Isn't that thing just aluminum oxide? If mixed with a little chromium, it will be red. If mixed with a little iron or titanium, it will be blue. If mixed with other elements, it will be other colors. Then why not just use alumina? Or, just use aluminum? But when he thought about how easy it was to smelt aluminum, and that there was a time in history when it was more expensive than gold, he felt relieved again. After all, rubies that are fragmented, have a lot of impurities, and are not in good quality can be ground into powder. If you don't make metal aluminum or anything like that, the cost is so expensive. Gretel was interested in tinkering with electrolytic aluminum, but he lacked the conditions and couldn't develop electrolytic skills. After he clicked on the skill tree, he dived into bacterial culture again. Electrolytic aluminum. It seems that a group of senior brothers and sisters in Aurora are playing various electrolysis games. Let them play. It would be nice to have something to play with. Okay, now that someone is forcing him, Greed remembers this. The first step when I remembered this was to rub the electrolytic aluminum with my own hands. What were I thinking? Of course I checked the literature. Gretel held the badge and went straight to the control room at the top of the tower. Moss, please help me look up papers related to electrolysis. Good master. Search papers, keywords, electrolysis. Moss will search for you immediately, please wait. Tolling answered without hesitation. One of the benefits of having a high-level mage tower is that you can directly check documents through the tower spirit. It is said that the White Tower and several mage towers on the peak can be checked immediately after new papers are uploaded. The high-level mage towers around Neva City can be checked as long as they have been uploaded for more than half a month. I'm sorry for the high-level mage towers in other places. Depending on the frequency of maintenance by the council, it will usually be half a year to a year behind. Ordinary mage towers in other places, like the one Gretel used to stay in, the Mage Tower in Heartland City, it is better to subscribe to the magazine yourself. As for the papers that have not been published, they are generally invisible. Moss is very efficient in querying papers. The crystal ball flashed a few times, and a light screen was projected. There were 10 items on a page, including the title of the paper, keywords, and abstract. Greed flipped through a few pages and discovered that since he figured out the electrolysis technology last year, countless magicians have been working on it, and they have published more than 100 papers. That's great. I don't need to perform electrolysis myself anymore, Gretel was excited. It is indeed right to spread the technology. How many technology trees can one person promote? With so many magicians working together, this is the right way to promote the progress of the Parliament. As for the fact that there are too many papers and it's difficult to search, that's too easy to solve. Moss, search keywords, electrolysis, new substances. Moss, search keywords, electrolysis, metal. After checking it out, Greed was overjoyed. In the plasticity department and the transformation department, a magician in each department claimed that he had made a strange white metal. Greed spent 1 contribution point per paper to print out the 2 papers, and found that they even measured the density, hardness, melting point, and other indicators of the metal, and the gap between the indicators was quite large. Are they 2 metals? Gretel went to the trading center and bought both metals, and then asked Mr. Norwood to try enchanting. Not long after, Mr. Norwood ran over holding a silver rod with a shocked face. Boss, where did you find this? It's so useful. Does it work? It works. These 2 silvery white metals, one lighter, the other slightly heavier, were used to enchant the eternal flame, and both produced quite good results. The heavier one, Greed guessed, was aluminum. It cast spells more smoothly than ruby powder, consumed less magic power, and lasted longer. Greed guessed that was because ruby powder of poor quality contained a lot of impurities after all. The result of enchanting with magnesium is that the silver rod emits an extremely dazzling white light. Okay. Mr. Norwood, please write a paper. Let's give the paper and the 2 medals to Archmage Tolga. Archmage Tolga is like a treasure. It can even be said that the entire alchemy workshop is like a treasure. The raw materials for making these 2 metals, the former is cryolite and bauxite, and the latter is bitter earth and dolomite, are produced in large quantities in the kingdom. No more messing with ruby powder. That thing is thin, crumbly, and hard. It's painful to grind it. Why don't you grind it? The enchantment is not easy to use. Finally, I no longer have to deal with all kinds of low-grade ruby mines. Archmage Tolga, Mr. Norwood, and the 2 magicians who electrolyzed strange metals plunged into research to increase production. Set up a hydroelectric generator, wind the coil to increase the voltage, increase the current, make a larger mercury arc rectifier, a larger electrolyzer. What? Want Gretel to attend someone's funeral? What do you want to take back? Let him die? Oh, it's a funeral, right? That damn person has died long ago. The School of Change turned collectively and directly rejected Baron Hoppman's request. Greet himself happily led the students to start the practical work of treating infectious diseases. The hospital was finally completed, and the group of apprentices led by Greet were finally able to independently conduct bacterial culture microscopy for many infectious diseases such as cholera, dysentery, scarlet fever, and diphtheria. The question now is, where to find patients? Staying in a treatment center? Go to various temples and ask if there are any patients with infectious diseases. Please remember to turn around. Or are you like the priests of the Order of the God of Nature, or like Dr. Bell in the previous life, walking the streets and alleys looking for patients? Wait for the plague to break out in the city and then go around arresting people? It's not impossible, but when a large number of ready-made cases are needed to teach students, this method of waiting for patients to drop from the sky is obviously inconvenient. Greet decided to take a multi-pronged approach and ask the temple, the religious order, and the city hall to all come together. Then, he took 2 young priests from the God of Nature order and went to the treatment center in the port area. I haven't seen you for a while, but the treatment center is still the same. Businessmen, clerks, and apprentices came and went. Occasionally, poor people in shabby clothes with sad faces hesitated back and forth at the entrance of the treatment center, wanting to enter but stopping. Around dinner time, there will be injured dock workers limping with blood on their arms or legs, coming in to see if they can get some treatment, or mothers rushing in with their children in their arms. All in all, the stationed priests were basically able to handle it skillfully, and Gretel did not find any signs of infectious diseases, requiring him to activate an emergency plan. 2 peaceful and leisurely days passed. At noon on the 3rd day, Gretel was quietly reading a book in the treatment center. Suddenly, there was a rush at the door, and a group of crew members rushed in. Lord Priest, help! Gretel stood up suddenly. In just a moment, the ground in the treatment center was already covered with blood. There were at least 20 or 30 crew members sent in. The head was bruised and bleeding, the arm was suspected to be broken, the leg was suspected to be broken, the person was moaning loudly, the person was unconscious, the worst wounded person was carried by 2 people, and 2 people supported him one after the other. Body, don't let him shake. A long iron bar penetrated from his back to his chest, running through his entire body. It wasn't too far from the port to here, but the injured had already bled an unknown amount, and almost all of his clothes were stained red. The material of the clothes is good, but the skin on the face and hands is rough. He is obviously a sailor, maybe a high-ranking sailor. Next to him was an old man, panting, his woolen coat covered with blood. As soon as he entered the door, he slapped his money bag on the table. "Master Priest, please save him first. He is my son." Greet and Pastor Matthew jumped up together. Pastor Matthew shouted. Everyone, come out. Aaron, you go to the God of War temple and call someone. Franz, you go to the spring water temple. Call the high-level priest. It must be high-level. We can't handle this kind of injury. Greed had already pounced on the wounded, quickly looking at them and sorting them quickly. For those with broken arms, sit down, and for those with broken legs, do the same while sitting down. For those who are bleeding, throw in a tourniquet, gauze, etc., and point them to the position of the binding, or instruct them to hold it firmly. While looking over his shoulder, he turned back and shouted to the 2 apprentices he had brought with him. Tear off the wounded's clothes. Tear them off. If it doesn't work, cut them off. Clean the skin, clean the area around the wound with alcohol, and wait for us to take over. He took a quick look around and sorted out all the patients whose lives were not in danger and could be postponed. Returning to the center of the hall, the upper body clothes of the wounded man with a penetrating wound had all been cut off, revealing his bare back. An iron bar on the right rear side was particularly scary. Pastor Matthew bowed his head and prayed to the wounded, and white lights fell one after another, but he did not dare to touch the iron bars. The leader of the old man had a frown on his face and was pacing beside him. Master Priest, how are you? Can you be saved? Can you be saved? It's hard to say. Pastor Matthew finished a prayer, looked up and sighed. I can only help him hold on as long as possible until a high-level healer comes over to see if the thing can be pulled out. Alas, this injury is too dangerous, I am not sure at all. How long will it take for them to get here? If everything goes well, it will take at least an hour. I don't know if I can hold on, bring me the healing potion. Get more. Greet stood silently beside him. He called an apprentice to hold an endless ink pen, squatted opposite the injured person, and used detection magic to check repeatedly. After a while, he raised his head and said, Otherwise, can I help? Great little theater. Master Tolga, how many days can it take to write a thesis on genetic diseases? Gretel, thinking at least a few batches of peas need to be planted, it will probably take 3 years. Tolga, surprised 3 years is too long. Greet, no, I remembered, I have a plant regeneration spell. 1 week, I'll give you the paper in 1 week. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of 5-character quatrains swoon. There are poems but nothing to chant. It doesn't have to be in the mountains and forests. I want to pursue the present and the past. Who understands the sound? It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 310. Gretel had treated several abdominal penetrating injuries in his previous life, and he had also treated one after time travel. But for penetrating injuries, one of its characteristics is no 2 patients with penetrating injuries are the same. Different injured people, different organ locations, penetrations of different thicknesses and materials, different penetration locations, and even slightly different organ locations, the results are very different. Some injured people may stab the liver with 1 stick, pierce the spleen, and break the major blood vessels. He died before being sent to the hospital, or he was still breathing when he was sent to the hospital. As soon as the abdomen was opened, the blood pressure plummeted, and he died before the doctor could find the blood vessels. Therefore, Gretel did not dare to take this injured person lightly. Fortunately, he looked left and right, and looked at it together with the magic X-ray, and he felt somewhat confident, thinking that the injured might still be able to be rescued. The iron bar penetrated through the 11th intercostal space on the back and exited above the pubic symphysis. This location is a bit far from the spine, presumably to avoid the liver and spleen, as well as the abdominal aorta and inferior vena cava. In other words, the probability of severe bleeding in a short period of time is not high, and it will not cause a disability that is difficult to recover. In addition, when the injured was brought in, Greet also took a look at the blood stains on his clothes. According to his rich clinical experience, the injured person's bleeding so far should not exceed 500 cc. Counting the subsequent intraoperative bleeding, with luck, he should be able to control it within 800 cubic centimeters, which is more dangerous, but he can still survive. Number. Greet had something in mind and volunteered. However, beside the injured man, the old man looked at him with squinted eyes and said doubtfully, Are you okay?" Greet choked. He touched the oak staff from behind and raised it silently. There were 3 hard and emerald green leaves on the top of the staff, and he knew it was a senior third-level priest at a glance. The old man was stunned for a moment, then he bent deeply towards him, his face wrinkled into a knot. "Master Priest, thank you for your kindness. But, if possible, let's wait for the high-level healer to come over, okay?" He looked uneasy and fearful, as if he was afraid that Greet would fall out on the spot. Gretel was stunned for a moment, and his attitude softened unconsciously. He knelt down and looked at him levelly. "Of course. Don't worry. Brother Matthew is very nice, then, I'll go see the other wounded first. It's up to the patient's family to choose the doctor, and he understands that. There is one attending physician and one director. He would definitely seek treatment from the chief physician. He had seen this kind of thing too often to get angry about it." Seeing that the old man was frightened, he squatted down and said a few words of comfort. The old man breathed a sigh of relief and nodded vigorously. Gretel smiled at him, excused himself, and walked away. He quickly changed into hand-washing clothes, and together with the 3 original low-level priests in the treatment center and the 2 apprentices he brought, he treated other injured people. Cleaning, bandaging, bone setting, suturing. Oh, forget about the sutures. Because of the healing technique, no sutures have emerged yet. I can only direct positive energy to deal with it to speed up the healing of the wound. This was such a busy time that half an hour passed before I knew it. Pastor Matthew was dripping with sweat and looked out the door more and more often. The breath of the injured was getting weaker and weaker. It was obvious that the healing skills were almost exhausted. A clutter of footsteps finally sounded. Just as Pastor Matthew's face was filled with joy, he saw a 4th-level spring water goddess priest rushing in behind his companion. The knights of the temple went out for training, and the archbishop followed them out. Only 3 people were left in the temple. The young priest who went to the God of War temple to ask for help hurriedly said. The priest who arrived nodded to Matthew and immediately began to pray. Light blue, watery brilliance shot out from between his hands, silently covering the injured body. However, there is not only a gap between level 4 and level 5, but also an essential sublimation. Many powerful magic spells cannot be used. As soon as Pastor Matthew stopped, visible to the naked eye, the injured man's vital signs began to become unstable. Priest, how long can you hold on? Can my son survive?" The old man squatted beside him and asked with a frown on his face. The priest wiped his sweat and shook his head. "Half an hour at most." The old man's eyes darkened. The location of the temple of the God of War is particularly remote. Even if both parties go out to ask for help at the same time, even if it takes another hour, people may not be able to come. The wounded who Gretel had just treated also came over. With their arms hanging and their legs lame, they crowded into a circle around the injured, talking all over the place. "Master Priest, you must save our first mate." "Yes, our first mate is the best. Last time, Tang En almost fell into the sea. He rushed over and pulled him back without his life. One of his arms was broken. And the last time." These wounded were all sailors, and even if they were decorated, they could shout at the top of their lungs. The treatment center was so noisy that the ceiling could be overturned. The priest's brain was about to be blown away by their noise. He couldn't bear it anymore and shouted. "Quiet. That's right, be quiet." Gretel finished handling the last debridement and came over to shout. Have you ever seen someone who doesn't need to be quiet when praying? Get out, get out. Don't make any noise here. He had just dealt with half of the wounded, and the sailors all gave him face and collectively shut up and backed away. The young priest gave Gretel a grateful look and continued to pray with his head lowered. Another handful of light rain fell from the palm of his hand. He took a quick breath and whispered. My magic is almost used up. Is there any spiritual potion? If you have any, give them to Pastor Matthew first. The eyes of two therapists and a patient's family member met, and they both saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. The wounded man let out a low groan, struggled slightly, and blood gushed out from his back again. It was obvious that the priest's healing skills were gradually weakening and he could no longer stop his pain. Andrei, don't move. Don't move. The old man stepped forward and supported his son's body. I wanted to make him lie down with less effort, but I didn't dare to use any force. My hands were trembling and I looked around hastily. Who can save his son? Who can? As he turned his eyes, he suddenly saw Gretel standing aside, looking at him silently. The old man's eyes lit up, but he didn't dare to speak. He only dared to express his pleading with his eyes. Gretel sighed slightly and nodded. The old man let go of his hands, turned around, and knelt down to him. Lord priest. Get up and say it. Get up. Greet quickly went up to help him. The old man grabbed his arms with his backhand and held them tightly, his entire weight falling on him. Master priest, please save my son. Please. Just now you said you could give it a try. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Gretel tried to persuade him. I'm not unwilling to take action. But this priest is treating you, and you. I'm almost running out of magic. Come here. The priest of the spring temple was not unhappy at all and immediately gave way. Gretel breathed a sigh of relief, nodded to him gratefully, and walked quickly to the injured person. Brother Matthew, carry the person to the operating room. The operating room is in the northwest corner of the first floor of the treatment center, farthest from the hall, and the door is closed. As soon as the stretcher was lifted, the injured person immediately began to scream again in a low voice as his internal injuries were affected. The old man quickly begged. Master priest, please relieve his pain. If this continues, it will hurt to death. If he can't help but struggle, he will be injured even more seriously. I thought so too. Pastor Matthew sighed helplessly. I have almost used all the higher level magical spells, and I have to save the last one for critical moments. The low-level magical spells can't stop the pain. Little Greet, what are you doing? Let me try. Greet had already leaned down. He pointed his fingers at the injured person's back, where the iron bar had penetrated, and recited a mantra in a low voice. As soon as the spell fell, Pastor Matthew could clearly see that the injured man's back muscles relaxed a little. Greet's men did not stop, then walked around to the front of the injured person and cast the spell again. After casting the spell, he leaned over and asked, Are you feeling better? Are you still in pain? The surface part of the human body has many pain-sensing nerves and is relatively sensitive. Internal organs are actually not very sensitive to pain. Of course, if this iron rod really penetrates into a fatal place and involves nerve pain, there is nothing I can do. We can only try our best to correct the scope of the spell. Better. The injured man replied weakly. The young priest looked surprised, but was too embarrassed to ask. Pastor Matthew asked on the spot. The pain really stopped? Little Greet, how did you do it? I'll tell you later, Gretel replied shortly. He directed others to carry the injured person into the operating room, positioned himself, and took out a small bottle of glycerin himself. Wipe it all over the injured person's abdominal skin and activate the B ultrasound magic. Well, there's not a lot of fluid in the abdominal cavity. It seems like the amount of bleeding inside is okay, the rod is a bit far away from the liver, it's also a bit far away from the spleen, there's something wrong with the intestines, but it's not big, the kidneys are bad. He closed his eyes, moved his lips, and kept mumbling. No matter whether others knew what he was doing or not, they did not dare to disturb him and just shut up and stood on both sides. After Greet finished the inspection, he ran to wash his hands and at the same time turned back to Pastor Matthew and shouted, "Brother Matthew, take out a handful of seeds. The thinnest, vine-type seeds you can find with no fuzz on them. Soak them in alcohol, I want to use them." The sound of water rushing. There was no special antiseptic hand sanitizer, so Greet could only use the most traditional surgical hand washing method, washing from fingertips to upper arms over and over again. After washing, he ran back to the injured person, smeared a strip of glycerin on the palm of his left hand, and sprinkled the seeds handed over by Matthew. The seed temporarily stuck to his palm. Greet put his right hand on the injured person's abdomen to activate the B ultrasound magic. He held the iron rod with his left hand and concentrated on stimulating the seeds. Slender vines, not much thicker than a hair, swayed out of his hands. They are arranged densely, with no gaps between them, as if weaving a green brocade for the iron rod, clinging to the iron rod, moving forward silently. Silently, it penetrated deep into the abdomen of the injured person and emerged from the back. Then, Gretel exerted force on his palm, and the vine seemed to shrink slightly inward, and then expand outward almost invisibly. "Brother Matthew, hold the iron rod steady. Follow its direction. Pull out. 3,000 words. Another 6,000 words done. Yangiran has finished paying back the extra 10,000 rewards. Tomorrow we will start paying back 10,000 rewards from at Red Comet Mars. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of Wujas writing articles and fighting on the street. The wind and rain hit my face. Open the window and the moon fills the lake. There is nothing on the desk. No need to write Manjusri. It's still not written by me, it's still written by the poetry machine. I feel like my writing is much better than mine, I really want to don't have to write Manjusri.